I stood in that basement counting out $1,200 bills, listening to my son explain to the neighbors why his father chose to live down there. "Dad's getting older," Christopher said through the ceiling. "The rent helps him feel independent. $1,200 is actually below market rate for a basement apartment." My name is Ryder Miller, 64 years old, a retired police officer, and 35 years as a police officer, and I'd never felt this cold. Not from the concrete floor under my bare feet, but from the realization that my own son saw me as a tenant. The same hands that taught him to ride a bike were now counting rent money. The same voice that read him bedtime stories was now being discussed, like a business transaction. But here's what Christopher didn't know. Those 35 years of police training don't just disappear. 3 days later, everything changed. But before I tell you what I discovered, let me know in the comments. Have you ever felt taken advantage of by your family? What would you do in my situation? And don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. It started 5 years ago when Margaret died. Cancer took her in 8 months, and I fell apart completely. 35 years protecting strangers as a cop, but I couldn't protect my own wife from disease. The guilt ate me alive. I started drinking, heavy, every night after the funeral, every weekend, every moment I wasn't working. Christopher found me passed out in our kitchen more times than I care to remember. My son, who I'd raised to be responsible and caring, became my caretaker. He'd drive over every evening after work at the dealership, clean up my messes, make sure I ate something, take away my car keys when I was too drunk to drive. Sarah would send over dinner plates, and my 3 grandchildren would sit with me, trying to cheer up their broken grandfather. Christopher saved my life that year. He got me into AA meetings, drove me to grief counseling, stayed on my couch when I was too depressed to be alone. Without him, I would have drunk myself to death. I believed him when he said he wanted to take care of me forever. 2 years ago, Christopher approached me with the idea, "Dad, you're rattling around in that big house alone. 4 bedrooms for one person doesn't make sense anymore." He was right. Every room held memories of Margaret. Her perfume still lingered in our closet. Her coffee mug sat in the same cabinet spot. I'd been thinking about downsizing but didn't know where to start. "Move in with us," Christopher said. "Sarah loves the idea. The kids want their grandfather closer. We'll all take care of each other." The house was worth over $1 million. Christopher handled all the paperwork. He'd always been good with financial details. "I'll put the money in a safe investment account for you, Dad. You'll never have to worry about anything again." The closing went smoothly. Christopher's dealership business seemed successful. Sarah was excited about the family togetherness. My grandchildren, Emma, 14, Jake, 12, and little Sam, 6, were thrilled about having Grandpa live with them. Christopher promised I'd have my own space, my independence, my dignity. But I should have read the fine print in those documents more carefully. Moving day felt like a fresh start. Christopher showed me around my area, the finished basement with a bedroom, small sitting area, and half bathroom. "It's perfect for you, Dad. Private entrance through the side door, your own thermostat, complete independence." Sarah measured the windows for curtains that never materialized. She talked about improvements and making it feel like home that somehow never happened. But I didn't mind. I was grateful to be near my family again. The first month went smoothly. Family dinners upstairs, movie nights with the grandchildren, Sarah's excellent cooking. Christopher seemed less stressed than he'd been in years. Then came the conversation about contributing to household expenses. "It's only fair, Dad," Christopher explained. "Utilities, groceries, wear and tear on the house. $1,200 a month covers your share. It's actually a great deal. Basement apartments in this neighborhood rent for $1,800. I felt uncomfortable, but Christopher's logic made sense. I was living in their house, eating their food, using their electricity. The money from my house sale was earning interest in that investment account. I could afford $1,200 monthly. That first payment hurt more than I expected, but it was nothing compared to what came next. The additional requests started small. "Dad, could you help with Emma's school supplies? The list this year is ridiculous." $200 for notebooks and calculators seemed excessive, but I wanted to support my granddaughter's education. Then Sarah's car needed emergency repairs. "The transmission just died, Ryder. We need $8,000 immediately, or Sarah can't get to work." I transferred the money from my investment account without question. Private school tuition for all 3 kids suddenly increased. Budget cuts from the state, Christopher explained. They're raising rates mid-semester. We need $15,000 to keep the kids enrolled. The education of my grandchildren was worth any price. Christopher's dealership hit some temporary cash flow issues. Supply chain problems, he said, delayed payments from customers. Just $20,000 to bridge the gap, Dad. Business will pick up next quarter. Each time I helped, Christopher seemed more grateful, but also more anxious. His hands shook when he thanked me. His eyes darted around nervously during our conversations. Sarah complained about his work stress and how he'd started taking phone calls in the garage at odd hours. Each time I helped, my savings account got smaller. But each time I helped, the problems seemed to get bigger, not smaller. Christopher's behavior changes worried me more than the money. Mood swings that reminded me of my own depression after Margaret's death, but different. Euphoric one day, despondent the next. Secretive phone calls that stopped abruptly when I walked into a room. Mail started arriving for Christopher at different addresses. When I asked about it, he said it was business stuff and privacy protection for the dealership. But my police instincts wondered why someone needed mail forwarded to 3 different P.O. boxes. Strange men called the house at all hours. When I answered, they'd hang up immediately. When Christopher answered, he'd take the phone into the garage and speak in whispers. Sarah complained about pushy salespeople and business contacts with no manners. I noticed Christopher's hands trembling when he thought no one was looking. The same tremor I'd seen in addicts during my police years. But Christopher didn't drink much, and I'd never seen evidence of drug use. Late at night, I'd hear him pacing upstairs. Footsteps back and forth across the kitchen floor for hours. Sometimes I'd hear muffled crying, but when I asked Sarah about it the next morning, she'd say Christopher was just overwhelmed with work. My 35 years of police training were telling me something was seriously wrong. Then I found the first piece of evidence. I was helping Christopher clean his car, a Saturday morning ritual we'd maintained since he was 16, when I found the hidden compartment, a small space behind the spare tire where someone had carved out room for a metal box. Inside, lottery tickets, hundreds of them, dating back 2 years. Scratch-offs worth $5, $10, $20 each. Some winners, mostly losers. But the volume was staggering. I counted tickets worth over $3,000 in purchases. Underneath the lottery tickets, casino receipts, cash advances from ATMs inside gambling establishments, Foxwoods, Mohegan Sun, and smaller local casinos I recognized from police raids in my working years. The amounts were alarming. 500 here, 2,000 there, 8,000 in a single weekend. My hands shook as I discovered online poker transaction records on a forgotten tablet. Account names I didn't recognize, but with Christopher's bank routing numbers. Sports betting apps with staggering loss totals. Daily fantasy football lineups with entry fees that matched my monthly rent payments. The evidence painted a picture I didn't want to see. My son wasn't struggling with business problems or financial bad luck. Christopher had a gambling addiction that was consuming every dollar he could find, including mine. But the worst discovery was at the bottom of the box, documents referencing Big Mike and payment schedules that made my blood freeze. That night I heard Christopher on the phone in the garage. I crept to the side door and listened to words that broke my heart and terrified me simultaneously. "I need more time, Mike. Just 2 more weeks. My dad has retirement money I can access." Christopher's voice was desperate, pleading in a way I'd never heard before. A pause. Then, "No, he doesn't know about the debt. He thinks I'm having business problems. Look, the old man has at least $200,000 in his investment account. I can get power of attorney if I claim dementia." My legs went weak. I pressed my back against the cold garage wall, struggling to process what I was hearing. "The total is $342,000, Christopher continued. "I know it's a lot, but I can pay. My dad trusts me completely. He'll sign anything I put in front of him." Another pause. Christopher's voice got smaller, more frightened. "Don't threaten my family, Mike. My kids don't have anything to do with this. Neither does my dad. This is between you and me." But his voice betrayed the fear. Whatever Mike was saying, it involved all of us. I heard footsteps approaching the door and slipped back into the basement. That's when I knew my grandchildren were in real danger.
The financial demands escalated immediately after that phone call. Christopher raised my rent to $1,500, citing market adjustments and inflation costs. Late fees appeared for paying on the 2nd instead of the 1st of the month. New rules about shower times, kitchen access, and use of the family car. Sarah's attitude toward me shifted dramatically. Comments about elderly care costs and how supporting a senior citizen was affecting their lifestyle. She started referring to me as their tenant instead of dad in conversations with neighbors.
The worst part was watching my grandchildren learn new behaviors. Emma, my 14-year-old granddaughter, who used to run to me for homework help, started approaching with carefully rehearsed requests for money. "Grandpa, could you help pay for my field trip? Mom and Dad said to ask you directly." Jake and Sam followed similar scripts. Money for sports equipment, video games, treats at the store. Amounts that seemed small individually but added up to hundreds monthly. I realized Christopher and Sarah were coaching the kids to extract money from me through emotional manipulation. When I tried to discuss budgets or suggest the children learn about earning money through chores, Sarah shut down the conversation. "Ryder, you don't understand modern parenting. Kids today have different needs than when you were raising Christopher." The psychological pressure was subtle but constant, being treated like a burden in the home I'd helped purchase, being made to feel guilty for taking up space, using utilities, eating food I was already paying for through rent and constant additional contributions. But the family dynamics were nothing compared to what happened next. The humiliation was about to become public. The social humiliation started at neighborhood gatherings. When longtime neighbors asked about our new living arrangement, Christopher's explanations made my skin crawl. Dad wanted to downsize and have less responsibility, he'd tell Mrs. Henderson from next door. The basement apartment gives him independence while keeping family close. We charge him fair market rent because we believe in teaching financial responsibility, even to family members. At the grocery store, Sarah would introduce me to her friends as Christopher's father, who rents our basement. The phrasing always made it sound like I was a stranger they'd taken in, rather than the man who'd raised her husband and helped fund their entire lifestyle. My old police colleagues started asking uncomfortable questions. "Bob, I heard you're living with your son now. Everything okay financially?" The assumption that I couldn't afford my own place was humiliating. These were men who'd known me for decades, who understood my pension and savings situation. Christopher coached the grandchildren to explain our arrangement to their friends' parents. "Grandpa lives in our basement and pays rent just like a regular tenant." The kids repeated this explanation with practiced ease, not understanding how it made their grandfather sound like a charity case. Church members, neighbors, family friends, everyone started treating me differently. The respect I'd earned through 35 years of public service seemed to evaporate overnight. Instead of Ryder Miller, retired police sergeant, I became Ryder Miller, elderly father who couldn't manage independent living. But I still had my dignity, my self-respect, my belief that this arrangement was temporary. Then came the night that changed everything. A conversation that revealed just how little my family valued the man who'd sacrificed everything for them. The first direct threat came on a Tuesday morning. I was walking Sam to school when a black sedan pulled alongside us. Two men in expensive suits, but their eyes were cold, predatory, the kind of eyes I'd seen in organized crime investigations. "You Ryder Miller?" the driver asked. "We're looking for your son Christopher. Family business matter." Sam was holding my hand, backpack bouncing as he skipped beside me. I pulled him closer and kept walking. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Old man, your boy owes our associates a significant amount of money. Time's running out on payment arrangements." The passenger leaned forward. "Nice family you got here. Be a shame if something happened to disrupt their routine." They drove away slowly, deliberately, making sure I understood this wasn't a chance encounter. That afternoon, Emma came home from high school shaken. "Grandpa, some men were asking about Dad at school. They said they were family friends, but something felt wrong." She described the same sedan, the same cold eyes. I called Christopher immediately. His voice was panicked when I described the encounters. "Dad, listen to me carefully. If anyone approaches you or the kids again, call me immediately. Don't talk to them. Don't give them any information." "Christopher, what kind of trouble are you in?" "It's just business stuff, Dad. Some misunderstandings about payment schedules. I'm handling it, but I need you to stay alert." That night, I heard him begging Sarah for her jewelry, her engagement ring, anything valuable they could sell quickly. Her shocked refusal, his desperate explanation about temporary problems and people who don't understand business delays. I realized then that I wasn't the only victim in this situation. My grandchildren were potential targets for whatever Christopher had gotten himself into. The breaking point came when I found evidence that put everything in perspective. While helping Sarah with laundry, I discovered Christopher's hidden cell phone in a jacket pocket. The text messages revealed the true scope of our family's danger. Payment overdue 30 days, interest accruing daily. Next contact will be physical demonstration. The number was listed under Big Mike in Christopher's contacts. More messages detailed payment schedules, penalty fees, and consequences for default. The amounts were staggering, $342,150 total, more than twice what I'd made in my final year as a police sergeant. But the most terrifying messages involved collateral. Family assets acceptable for partial payment, house title, vehicle registrations, life insurance policies. Alternative arrangements include physical collection methods. I understood the language perfectly. These weren't traditional lenders. This was loan sharking with organized crime connections. The physical collection methods could involve kidnapping, assault, or worse against any family member they chose. Christopher had borrowed money from criminals and used our home, our family, our safety as collateral. That night I sat in my basement room holding my police badge from 1987, the same badge I'd carried during investigations of exactly these kinds of criminal operations. I'd spent years building cases against loan sharks, protecting families from predatory lenders, arresting men who threatened children to collect gambling debts. Now I needed to protect my own family from the same criminals. My police training kicked in automatically. Gather evidence, build a case, identify all parties involved, develop a strategy to neutralize the threat. But I wasn't prepared for what happened at Emma's school concert. The humiliation that would force me to choose between my son and my grandchildren's safety. Emma's middle school spring concert should have been a proud moment. She'd been practicing violin for months, and I'd promised to be in the front row. The auditorium was packed with parents, grandparents, and family friends, many of whom I'd known for years through police work and community involvement. Before the concert started, other grandparents approached me with friendly questions. "Bob, how's retirement treating you? I heard you're living with Christopher's family now." I explained that we were sharing a house, that it was working out well for everyone. Normal conversation among people who'd known me as a respected member of the community. Then Sarah arrived with Christopher's business associate from the dealership and his wife. People I'd never met, but who Sarah clearly wanted to impress. Successful-looking couple, expensive clothes, the kind of social connection Sarah valued. "This is Ryder, Christopher's father," Sarah introduced me. "He lives in our basement apartment. We charge him $1,200 monthly rent because we believe in teaching financial responsibility, even to elderly family members." The words hit me like a physical blow. In front of my granddaughter's teachers, her friends' parents, neighbors who'd known me for decades, Sarah had just announced that I was a paying tenant in my son's house. Not a beloved grandfather sharing a family home, but a renter who needed lessons in financial responsibility. The conversation around us stopped. People stared. Mrs. Patterson, whose husband I'd helped arrest for embezzlement 15 years ago, looked at me with pity. Mr. Davis, my former patrol partner's father, shook his head sadly. Emma's eyes found mine from the stage. Even at 14, she understood that something terrible had just happened to her grandfather in front of everyone who mattered. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I couldn't sleep after the concert. The humiliation burned in my chest like acid. 35 years protecting my community, and now everyone thought I was a financial burden who couldn't manage independent living. But the shame wasn't the worst part. The worst part was realizing that Sarah had deliberately chosen that moment, that audience, to establish my status in their social circle. I wasn't family anymore. I was a tenant with problems. I sat on my basement bed holding my police badge from 1987. The weight of it reminded me of every oath I'd taken, every promise to protect innocent people from criminals and predators. The same badge I'd carried when investigating families destroyed by gambling addiction and loan shark violence. protect, and serve. That oath didn't have an expiration date.
I thought about Emma's embarrassed face when her friend's parents stared at me with pity, about Jake and Sam learning to see their grandfather as someone who needed financial responsibility lessons, about the black sedan following my grandchildren to school. My police training had taught me to recognize patterns. Christopher's gambling addiction was escalating. The loan shark threats were becoming more direct. My family was in increasing danger, and I was the only one with the knowledge and connections to protect them. At 3 a.m., I made my first call to Detective Morrison, my former partner who now worked with the Federal Gambling Task Force. My second call was to legal aid about elder financial abuse documentation. My third call changed everything. The Federal Task Force had been investigating the same loan shark operation that Christopher owed money to. They needed someone with inside access to gather evidence for a RICO case. But I had no idea how dangerous this investigation would become. Detective Morrison's news transformed our family crisis into something much larger. Bob, the operation your son's involved with is part of a federal investigation. Multi-state loan sharking ring with ties to organized crime. We've been building a RICO case for 18 months. The implications were staggering. Christopher wasn't just gambling with criminals. He was potentially involved in a federal racketeering case. His dealership business could be considered part of the money laundering operation if he'd used it to hide gambling losses or make payments to illegal lenders. We need someone on the inside, Morrison explained. Someone with investigative experience who can document evidence without raising suspicion. Your position in the household is actually perfect. The federal agents offered witness protection for the entire family if we cooperated with their investigation. Christopher could potentially avoid prison time if he testified against the loan shark operation, but only if we gathered enough evidence to make the case stick. They provided me with professional recording equipment disguised as a hearing aid, high-definition cameras that looked like everyday household items, digital tracking software to monitor financial transactions and communications. For the first time in months, I felt like myself again, not a helpless elderly man being exploited by his family, but a trained investigator with a mission to protect innocent people from criminal organizations. The federal agents explained that loan shark operations target vulnerable families, specifically because emotional manipulation makes victims less likely to report crimes. Christopher's gambling addiction had made our entire family perfect targets for financial exploitation, and worse. But they warned me about escalation patterns. As pressure from the loan sharks increased, Christopher would become more desperate, more dangerous to himself and others. I want to pause here and ask, if you discovered your own child was putting your grandchildren in danger, how far would you go to protect them? Let me know your thoughts. The next phase of the investigation would test everything I believed about family loyalty versus protecting innocent lives. The evidence-gathering phase felt like returning to my old job, but with heartbreaking personal stakes. Every conversation with Christopher was now being recorded. Every phone call he made from the house was monitored. Every financial transaction was documented for federal prosecutors. The pattern became clear quickly. Christopher's gambling debts weren't just personal addiction problems. They were fueling a criminal enterprise that threatened families across multiple states. The loan sharks used fear, intimidation, and violence to collect payments that funded larger illegal operations. Hidden cameras revealed Christopher meeting with representatives from the criminal organization in our garage. Cash payments, threats about payment schedules, discussions about using family members as leverage for compliance. My son had become both victim and participant in organized crime. The recording equipment picked up conversations that broke my heart. Christopher begging for more time while the criminals demanded immediate payment. Sarah discovering hidden debts, and Christopher's desperate lies to explain their financial situation. My grandchildren asking innocent questions about the strange men who kept calling the house. But the most damaging evidence came from Christopher's own words. Recorded conversations where he discussed forging power of attorney documents to access my savings accounts. Plans to have me declared mentally incompetent so he could control my finances legally. Federal agents assured me that this evidence would protect me from financial exploitation while building their case against the loan shark operation. Then the recording device picked up something that broke my heart completely. A conversation that revealed exactly how my family really felt about the man who'd sacrificed everything for them.
The conversation happened on a Saturday afternoon while I was supposedly napping in the basement. Christopher and Sarah thought I couldn't hear their discussion in the kitchen directly above my bedroom. "The old man has at least $200,000 left in his retirement accounts," Christopher said. "If we can get power of attorney, we can access everything without him knowing." Sarah's response chilled me to the bone. "Your father is becoming more of a burden every week. The rent money isn't enough to offset having him here.
Maybe it's time to look into assisted living facilities."
"We need his money first," Christopher replied. "I can probably convince him to sign financial documents if I claim it's for tax purposes or estate planning. He trusts me completely." Their voices carried clearly through the thin basement ceiling. Sarah continued, "The kids are getting too attached to him. They're starting to question why Grandpa pays rent. It's becoming awkward when their friends come over." Christopher's response revealed the depth of his desperation. "Look, if the payment doesn't happen by next month, Big Mike's people are going to take physical action. They've made it clear that family members are acceptable collateral. I'd rather have Dad safely in a nursing home than risk something happening to the kids." The recording captured everything. My son and daughter-in-law discussing my mental competence, my financial exploitation, and my removal from the family home I'd helped purchase. They saw me as a resource to be depleted and discarded, not a person deserving respect and dignity. That's when I knew I had to choose between protecting my son and protecting my grandchildren. Sunday morning, I met with the federal task force team at a diner outside town. Detective Morrison reviewed the evidence we'd gathered, recorded threats from loan sharks, documentation of Christopher's gambling debts, proof of financial exploitation attempts, and evidence of organized crime connections. "We have enough for arrest warrants," Agent Rodriguez explained. "The loan shark operation, Christopher's involvement, and the elder abuse charges. But we need to move quickly before they escalate to violence." The timeline was immediate. Federal raids would happen Wednesday morning when the children were safely at school. Christopher would be arrested for racketeering conspiracy and elder financial abuse. The loan sharks would be taken down simultaneously across multiple locations.
Sarah would likely face charges related to elder abuse unless she cooperated fully with the investigation. The children would be placed temporarily with child services while family court sorted out custody arrangements. I spent that Sunday writing letters to each of my grandchildren. Letters they would read when they were old enough to understand why their grandfather had to make such a devastating choice. Letters explaining that love sometimes requires consequences, that protecting innocent people is worth personal sacrifice. The federal agents arranged temporary housing for me during the investigation and trial phases. Witness protection if needed, though they expected Christopher's cooperation once he understood the alternative was decades in federal prison. I placed my police badge from 1987 next to the letters in my safety deposit box. Wednesday morning, everything came to a head. The life our family had built on lies and exploitation was about to collapse completely. 6 a.m. Wednesday morning, federal agents surrounded our house. I was already awake, dressed, sitting in the basement with a packed suitcase. The sound of car doors slamming and heavy footsteps on the front porch would be the last normal sounds our family home would ever hear. "Federal agents! Search warrant!" The pounding on the front door sent Sarah running from the kitchen. Christopher's shocked voice from upstairs. "What the hell is happening?" Agent Rodriguez led the team through our front door while I sat calmly in the basement, listening to my family's world collapse above me. Sarah's confused questions, Christopher's panicked denials, the children being gently escorted to a neighbor's house for safety during the search. "Christopher Miller, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit racketeering, elder financial abuse, and money laundering through illegal gambling operations." His shocked voice. Dad, tell them this is crazy. You know I would never hurt you." But I stayed in the basement until Agent Rodriguez came to get me. When I finally walked upstairs, Christopher was handcuffed in our living room, surrounded by evidence boxes and federal agents. Sarah was crying, holding legal documents she didn't understand. Christopher's eyes met mine across the room, the look of betrayal, confusion, and desperate pleading. "Dad, please, tell them you weren't being abused. Tell them I was taking care of you." That was just the beginning of Christopher's nightmare. The evidence we'd gathered was about to become public record, revealing not just his gambling addiction, but his willingness to exploit his own father to fund it. The search warrant covered everything:
Christopher's computers, cell phones, financial records, and business documents from the dealership. Federal agents photographed every room, documented every piece of evidence, cataloged every item that could support their case. Sarah watched in horror as agents revealed the scope of Christopher's deception. Bank statements showing the $342,150 debt. Loan shark payment schedules. Recorded conversations about forging power of attorney documents. Evidence of using the dealership business to launder gambling money. Mrs. Miller, did you know your husband borrowed money from organized crime figures? Agent Rodriguez asked Sarah directly. Her shock was genuine. Organized crime? Christopher told me he was having business problems. I thought the financial stress was from supply chain issues at the dealership. The agents showed her evidence of Christopher's hidden gambling accounts, casino transaction records, sports betting losses, online poker deposits that matched their household's missing money. The systematic deception that had been destroying their family's finances for over 2 years. Christopher's attempt to explain felt pathetic even to me. It started small, just lottery tickets. Then I had a big win and thought I could quit my job, make enough to really take care of everyone. But the losses kept getting bigger. The federal agents weren't interested in his gambling sob story. They were building a criminal case against a loan shark operation that had victimized families across multiple states. Mr. Miller, your gambling addiction funded illegal lending operations. Your dealership business was used to launder money for organized crime. These aren't personal problems, they're federal crimes. Then the loan sharks arrived at the house. 3 black sedans pulled into our driveway just as federal agents were loading evidence boxes into their vehicles. The timing couldn't have been more perfect for the federal case. As agents were documenting the final evidence from our house, Big Mike's crew arrived to collect their payment. 3 cars full of the same cold-eyed men who'd been threatening my grandchildren. Agent Rodriguez coordinated with tactical units positioned around the neighborhood. This is exactly what we needed. The criminal organization showing up during our raid. Perfect evidence of ongoing illegal operations. The loan sharks had no idea they were driving into a federal trap. They approached our house expecting to find a vulnerable family they could intimidate into payment. Instead, they found armed federal agents with arrest warrants. FBI, get down on the ground. The scene played out like something from my old police days, but with our family home as the crime scene. Tactical officers arresting armed men, evidence collection from multiple vehicles, coordination between different federal agencies. Christopher watched from the back of a police car as the criminals who'd been threatening his family were arrested. The full scope of what he'd gotten involved with was finally visible. These weren't just gambling creditors, they were violent criminals who would have hurt his children to collect their money. Sarah stood in our driveway holding federal protection paperwork, realizing how close our family had come to physical violence. The men being arrested were the same ones who'd followed Emma home from school, who'd threatened Sam and me during our walk. As they led Christopher away in handcuffs, Sarah finally understood the choice I'd been forced to make. Her husband's gambling addiction had put our entire family in danger from organized crime, but the hardest moment was yet to come. The immediate aftermath felt like a natural disaster had destroyed our family home. Federal agents, crime scene tape, neighbors gathering on the sidewalk to stare at the spectacle. The house where my grandchildren had grown up was now evidence in a federal criminal case. Child Services arrived to collect Emma, Jake, and Sam from the neighbor's house. The children were confused, frightened, asking questions no child should have to ask. Why is Daddy in handcuffs? Where are we going? When can we come home? Sarah's breakdown was complete. The husband she'd trusted for 12 years was a criminal. The financial security she'd assumed was stable was built on illegal gambling and loan shark money. The home where she'd raised 3 children was now a crime scene. Federal agents offered protective custody for all of us. The loan shark operation had been neutralized, but criminal organizations often had backup networks. Our safety couldn't be guaranteed until the entire case was resolved through the courts. I packed my few belongings from the basement room I'd been renting in my own former home. Clothes, photos, and the letters I'd written to my grandchildren. Everything that remained of my independent life fit in 2 suitcases. Community support surprised me. Neighbors who'd witnessed my public humiliation at the school concert now understood what had really been happening. Former police colleagues offered assistance. Church members provided practical help during the transition. But seeing my grandchildren driven away in child services vehicles was the most heartbreaking moment of the entire ordeal. Christopher's gambling addiction hadn't just destroyed his life, it had shattered 3 innocent children's sense of safety and family stability. The federal case was just beginning, but my family as I'd known it was already over. 3 weeks later, I sat across from Christopher in the county jail visiting room. He looked older, thinner, broken in ways that went beyond physical appearance. The orange jumpsuit, handcuffs, and bulletproof glass between us made conversation feel surreal. "Dad, why?" His first words weren't apologies or explanations, just confusion and betrayal. I was trying to fix everything. I was going to pay back every penny once I got ahead of the losses. I'd rehearsed this conversation dozens of times, but facing my son in jail clothes made every word feel inadequate. "Christopher, you borrowed money from criminals. You put your children in danger. You were planning to steal my life savings and have me declared mentally incompetent." His face crumpled. "I never meant for it to go that far. The gambling just got out of control. Each time I thought I could win back what I'd lost and everything would be fine." The federal case against him was solid: racketeering conspiracy, elder financial abuse, money laundering through the dealership business. His court-appointed attorney had explained that cooperation with prosecutors was his only chance to avoid decades in federal prison. "The children are asking about you," I told him honestly. "They don't understand why Daddy isn't coming home. Sarah's trying to explain addiction and consequences to kids who just want their family back." Christopher broke down completely then. The desperate gambling, the desperate lies, the desperate choices that had led to this moment. "Dad, I know I can't fix this, but I need you to tell Emma, Jake, and Sam that I love them, that none of this was their fault. I had to choose between enabling you and protecting them," I wanted to say. But watching my son cry in jail clothes, I simply said, "I will." 3 months later, the trial began. Federal court proceedings moved efficiently once Christopher agreed to cooperate fully with prosecutors. His testimony against the loan shark operation provided evidence that connected criminal organizations across multiple states: names, dates, financial transactions, methods of operation. My testimony about elder financial abuse felt strange after 35 years of police work. Instead of investigating crimes against other families, I was describing crimes against myself. The humiliation at Emma's school concert became evidence of psychological manipulation. The rent payments became evidence of financial exploitation. Agent Rodriguez presented our recorded conversations to the court. Christopher's voice planning to forge power of attorney documents. Sarah's voice discussing nursing home placement to access my savings. Evidence of systematic exploitation designed to fund illegal gambling operations. The loan shark organization faced RICO charges that could result in life sentences. Christopher's cooperation and our evidence were crucial to convicting the entire criminal network. Federal prosecutors offered him 18 months in minimum security prison plus mandatory addiction treatment in exchange for his testimony. Sarah avoided criminal charges by cooperating completely with the investigation. Financial statements proved she'd been unaware of the gambling addiction and loan shark involvement. Her public humiliation of me was considered psychological abuse, but not criminal given her ignorance of the larger situation. The community response was mixed. Some neighbors expressed sympathy for our family's destruction. Others whispered about criminal behavior and poor judgment. Church members tried to be supportive, but the stigma of federal criminal cases affected everyone involved. Media coverage was minimal, but painful. Local car dealer arrested in federal gambling case. Retired police officer testifies against son in elder abuse trial. Headlines that reduced our family's destruction to sensational news items. But my biggest challenge was still ahead. Rebuilding relationships with grandchildren who'd witnessed their grandfather send their father to prison. Family therapy sessions began 6 months after Christopher's arrest. Court-mandated counseling for the children, voluntary sessions for Sarah and me, and family reconstruction therapy to address the trauma of everything that had happened. Emma, now 15, struggled most with conflicting loyalties. "Grandpa, I understand you were protecting us, but why did Daddy have to go to jail? Couldn't you have just helped him stop gambling?" The family therapist explained addiction cycles, enabling behaviors, and the difference between helping and harm. Sometimes love requires consequences, even when those consequences are painful for everyone involved. Jake and Sam at 13 and 7 adapted differently. Jake was angry at everyone. Christopher for lying, Sarah for not knowing, me for calling the police. Sam just wanted his family back together and couldn't understand why grown-ups were making everything so complicated. Sarah's apology came during one of these sessions. "Ryder, I'm sorry for how I treated you. I was stressed about money and didn't understand what was really happening. The things I said at the school concert. I was wrong to humiliate you like that." Gradual progress felt like rebuilding a house after a fire. New foundations, new trust, new boundaries. Sarah regained custody of the children after completing parenting classes and financial management courses. I found an independent senior living apartment that gave me dignity while keeping me close to family. Support groups for families affected by gambling addiction became part of our weekly routine. Stories from other families who'd survived similar destruction. Practical advice about rebuilding trust and establishing healthy financial boundaries. The federal agents stayed in contact during Christopher's imprisonment. Other families had come forward with similar stories after our case received media attention. Our cooperation was helping prosecute criminal organizations that had victimized vulnerable people across multiple states. A year later, I got a letter that changed everything again. Christopher's letter from prison, written after months of addiction treatment and reflection. Christopher's letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, written in his careful handwriting on state prison stationery. 18 months of federal imprisonment and mandatory addiction treatment had given him time to understand what his gambling had cost our family. "Dad, I know words can't fix what I did to you and the kids. The addiction treatment program has helped me understand how I turned everyone I loved into victims of my disease. You didn't betray me. You protected your grandchildren from a father who had become dangerous to their safety." The letter continued for 3 pages, detailed acknowledgement of every lie, every manipulation, every moment of exploitation. Recognition that my investigation and cooperation with federal agents had saved our family from much worse consequences. The other inmates here with gambling problems tell similar stories. Families destroyed, children traumatized, parents exploited. The counselors say addiction turns victims into victimizers. I stole your dignity, your savings, and your security. I made my own children afraid in their home. His treatment program required complete accountability. No excuses about business stress, no blame toward the loan sharks, no minimizing the impact of his choices. Full acceptance of responsibility for every consequence our family had suffered. I'm learning about making amends, but I know some damage can't be undone. The children have been through trauma that will affect them for years. Sarah has to rebuild her entire life. You lost the respect and security you'd earned through 40 years of honest work. Reading his words felt like glimpsing the son I'd raised before addiction took over his judgment and moral compass. But some damage couldn't be undone. The ongoing consequences affected everyone differently. Sarah struggled financially as a single mother working 2 jobs to maintain basic stability. The house had been seized as evidence and eventually sold to pay restitution to other victims of the loan shark operation. Emma started high school carrying the weight of family shame. Her friends knew about her father's arrest and imprisonment. Teachers tried to be understanding, but the stigma of criminal behavior affected her social relationships and academic confidence. Jake developed anxiety problems that required counseling and medication, sleep disturbances, difficulty concentrating in school, fear that other family members might disappear suddenly. The trauma of watching federal agents arrest his father had created lasting psychological damage. Sam, now 8, adapted with the resilience of young children but asked heartbreaking questions. "When Daddy comes home, will he still be sick? Will the bad men come back? Are we safe now?" Community support varied. Church members tried to be helpful, but some families quietly distanced themselves from association with criminal activity. Neighbors were sympathetic but cautious. Former police colleagues remained supportive, understanding the difficulty of my position. My new apartment provided independence and dignity, but the cost of family destruction was enormous. Relationships that had taken decades to build were damaged in ways that might never fully heal. Federal prosecutors kept me informed about the larger criminal case. Our evidence had led to convictions of dozens of loan shark operators across multiple states. Other families were finding justice because of our cooperation. Then came the day I'd been dreading and hoping for simultaneously. Christopher's release date approached, bringing uncertainty about whether real change was possible. Release day preparation involved family meetings, therapy sessions, and careful planning. Christopher would live in a halfway house for 6 months while transitioning back to society. Strict probation conditions, mandatory addiction treatment, and limited contact with family until everyone felt safe. Sarah's feelings were complicated. 18 months of single parenting had made her stronger, but also more cautious about trusting Christopher with their children's emotional and physical security. I need to see consistent change over time, not just promises and good intentions. The children's reactions varied by age and personality. Emma wanted to believe her father had changed, but remained skeptical. Jake was anxious about disruption to the stability we'd rebuilt. Sam was excited about seeing Daddy again, but confused about why visits had to be supervised. Family court proceedings established formal custody arrangements. Christopher could see his children in supervised settings while proving his recovery was genuine and permanent. No unsupervised contact until family therapists confirmed it was safe for everyone involved. My own feelings about Christopher's release were mixed. Hope that addiction treatment had restored the son I'd raised, but caution based on understanding that recovery is a lifelong process with many potential setbacks. Federal probation officers would monitor Christopher's finances, employment, and personal relationships for 3 years. Any evidence of gambling activity would result in immediate return to federal prison to serve his full original sentence. The halfway house placement was in another county to reduce temptation from familiar gambling locations and criminal associates. At 3 p.m. on a cold Tuesday afternoon, the doorbell rang at Sarah's rental house. Christopher was home, but our family would never be the same. Family dinners happened once weekly at neutral locations, restaurants where conversation stayed surface level, and supervised visits felt less artificial. Christopher looked healthier physically, but the psychological distance between us remained vast. "Dad, I know earning back trust will take years," he said during one of these careful meals. "The addiction treatment helped me understand that saying sorry isn't enough. I have to prove through actions that I've changed." Emma watched her father with the wariness of someone who'd learned not to believe promises from adults. Jake participated politely, but kept emotional distance. Sam was friendlier but confused about why family time required so many rules and supervision. Sarah enforced boundaries with firmness that reflected hard-earned wisdom. Christopher can visit the children, but he can't make decisions about their lives until he proves long-term stability. Recovery is measured in years, not months. My role in this new family dynamic was complicated. The grandfather who'd sent their father to prison, but also the man who'd protected them from criminal violence. Love mixed with consequences in ways that defied simple explanations. But the most important lesson came from Emma during a family therapy session. "Grandpa did what real love looks like," Emma said during a particularly difficult family therapy session. "He chose to protect us even though it hurt him to hurt Dad. That's harder than just letting bad things happen and hoping they get better." Her words became the final piece of understanding for everyone involved. Christopher's addiction had forced me to choose between enabling his destruction and protecting innocent children. Real love sometimes requires consequences that feel like betrayal. 6 months later, Emma wrote a school essay titled "What Real Love Looks Like" that she shared with our family. The essay described learning that protecting people sometimes means making choices that hurt, that boundaries aren't punishment but safety, that consequences can be expressions of care. I keep that essay in my wallet next to my police badge from 1987. 2 reminders of a lifetime spent trying to protect innocent people from harm, even when those people were my own family. Christopher's recovery continues one day at a time. Our family's healing happens slowly, carefully, with professional guidance and realistic expectations. Sometimes love looks like sending your son to prison to save your grandchildren from criminals. And sometimes that's exactly what love should look like.